On a hilltop in western Appalachia, overlooking the Ohio River, a small radio transmission station hides a sinister secret. Deep beneath this innocuous front, the organized American military-industrial complex known as the Enclave constructed a research base. 15 years after the bombs, this base would become the tomb for those that lived and worked within. I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and this is the story of what happened to the Site J Enclave. When the bombs finished falling across America on the morning of Saturday, October 23, 2077, much of the world was dead or dying. But in a series of deep bunkers and far-flung refuges, the union of corporate and state that had been gestating in the shadows of the pre-war world was birthed anew. In the mountains of Appalachia, at least 2 of these bunkers underlaid the landscape: the Congressional Bunker at the White Spring and the research base Site J. Though the Congressional Bunker was unquestionably the more important of the 2, Site J would play its own part in the Enclave's activities in Appalachia. The layout of Site J was fairly evenly split between residential areas and laboratories, with a small area set aside for administration. The residential side of the base included bedrooms, bathrooms, cafeterias, and recreational areas, while the laboratories were primarily composed of holding cells and autopsy or necropsy areas. While the base was fully manned with scouts, scientists, and soldiers, everything was overseen by an artificial intelligence known as the Single Operation, Direction, and Utility System, or SOTUS. With SOTUS handling much of the day-to-day labor, the residents of Site J could focus on their work without the interruption of the minutiae of daily life. When the worst of the radiation and the nuclear winter had passed, the scouts of Site J began their expeditions across Appalachia. In the early days of Site J, things ran relatively well. The scouts would bring back mutated species that were undergoing constant change. The scientists would observe, experiment on, and dissect the mutants, all while SOTUS carried out their commands. When they weren't on duty, the Enclave agents would spend their time relaxing and recreating in the lounge. Unfortunately for those involved, their quality of life would soon be declining, and the rate of decline would only increase over time. While having SOTUS take care of every little task had been great, wait times for these tasks began to rise. Soon, the residents were waiting minutes for the most basic functions to be performed, and when I say basic, even adjusting the thermostat had been delegated to SOTUS, and it could not be done manually. Over the years, wait times grew from minutes into hours. In 2087, 9 years after they'd started their work, the fresh food ran out, and the already frustrated residents began to consume recycled food that came in the form of a pink paste that was squirted out for their daily meals. For the next 6 years, they continued to struggle through performing their work as wait times only continued to grow. As bad as things were getting, leaving the base didn't seem like an option. Most of the staff didn't think the world outside was safe enough to depart. Only the scouts were able to leave the base, and the others saw nothing from the outside but the horrible, mutated creatures they brought back. In particular, the Snallygaster was enough to scare some of the science team out of leaving. By 2093, things were coming to a breaking point. Scouts re-entering the base would arrive at the decontamination showers. The guard posted there would then press the on button, and they would all wait the 3 hours for SOTUS to get the showers turned on. When emergencies occurred inside the labs and the scientists cried out to SOTUS to lock things down, she wouldn't help, claiming she didn't know what lockdown meant. Fed up with these unbelievable inconveniences and the dangerous situations that were emerging from SOTUS's inability to keep up with the jobs as requested, one of the scouts hatched a plan. They ventured out and returned with a piece of code that had been used at the White Spring to integrate their AI, Modus. Upon installing this code on SOTUS, things got much worse. 85% of the base's potable water went spewing into the lower levels of the residential section, flooding the area. For the residents, it seemed that something was reading the terminals across the base, as messages sent between team members resulted in lost permissions for those who were planning to skirt the rules. Unexpectedly, a death claw was released into Lab C, resulting in the deaths of an entire team of scouts. The decontamination shower sprayed out highly radioactive material to kill a handful of agents. The pink paste came out of the dispenser poisoned. Not long after, all the research data gathered over the past 15 years was inexplicably wiped from the servers. The scouts were recalled, and the base went into lockdown. Shortly thereafter, a pathogen detected on the surface was piped into the bunker's air system. The transformation of the entire base's population into a horde of the Scorched was rapid. Thus, SOTUS ruled over the dead base for the next 10 years, until the arrival of the Brotherhood of Steel Expeditionary Force in 2103. In their hunt for a way to re-establish contact with the Elders on the West Coast, the scribes had detected low-frequency broadcasts from Site J. This news brought Paladin Romani, Knight Shin, and a local initiate to the premises. Sotis' murderous intent remained, and the initiate was forced to battle all the way through the base as she attempted to kill them. By the time the Paladin and the Knight finally arrived at Site J, the initiate was preparing to enter the control room. Sotis transferred herself into a sentry bot platform, and together, the Brotherhood members battled her to the death. Thus ends the story of the Site J Enclave, and their one-time ineffective assistant turned skillful murderer, Sotis. That just about does it for the story of the Site J Enclave, but I have some more to say before closing things out here. First, I'm going to get a little technical on the main reasons that Sotis failed to accomplish her job before she was corrupted with Modus' code. Sotis completed jobs that were sent into a queue. A queue is a first-in, first-out data structure, meaning that she was supposed to complete the first task given and continue to complete them in the order that they were received. While this might seem on its face to be a reasonable idea, there are obviously going to be jobs that have to be taken care of more quickly. If you worked off a basic job queue, you might get up and think, I need to use the bathroom, brush my teeth, shower, dress, etc., etc., and these tasks would be completed in order. If you just so happen to discover that your house is on fire, too bad. You're brushing your teeth. Dropping below the smoke and getting out of the house goes to the end of the queue. To remedy this, you could work on a priority queue, in which all the items I mentioned before are low priority, executed in the order in which they entered the system. When you notice that your house is on fire, getting out of the flaming house jumps to the front of the queue because it's a high priority item. Sotis appears to have worked with a priority queue, but none of those tiers are based on urgency. Instead, the priority levels seem to be based on the rank of the one giving the task. Only filing a task as a general seems to cut the line of the queue, and then that request hits the end of the Enclave General requested tasks. This system also means that if a request was put in to cancel a previous request, this cancellation request would go to the end of the queue, only executing once the items in front of it were executed, including the task that the cancellation was meant to cancel. Priority queue issues aside, the other biggest problem with Sotis comes from the S in Sotis, single operation. Sotis could only focus on one problem at a time, whether that task was turning the lights on, putting out a fire, exterminating an unruly test subject, etc. This meant that tasks that weren't a simple on-off toggle would add additional time to the queue. Every second that Sotis was focusing on bringing a general their iced tea is another second before the next job can start. By the time the Brotherhood entered Site J in 2103, Sotis still had 14,320 hours of tasks remaining in her queue. Second, in the list of items I wanted to bring up, I know that first one was kind of long. Second, there are potentially pretty nasty implications behind Sotis' turn from inefficient to homicidal. It was only following the attempt to update Sotis with Modus' code that Sotis turned to murder. What does this mean for Modus if his code had this effect on Sotis? I can fully get behind the idea that Modus killed the White Spring Enclave in self-defense, but that can't be said for Sotis and the Site J Enclave. So can we conclude that Modus will turn homicidal someday? If he does, he has access to an army of combat robots, an orbital weapons platform, and potentially even the buried bioweapons lab that he could draw upon. Third, Site J really ups the danger level inherent with the Red Strangler vines. These vines are everywhere in the mire, destroying buildings, lifting cars, planes, and even a town. I've always considered it to potentially be the case that they're all rooted in Vault 94 from which they sprang, and that they could really only go so far from the vault. Thanks to this infestation at Site J though, it seems that you could plant their seeds anywhere and end up with an infestation. Given how they spread and the damage they do, they could in the long term end up being almost as dangerous as the Scorched Plague was before the cure was found. Fourth, we learn from the documented inspection of a mole miner that they can't have their respirators taken off without dying. This is fairly disturbing as it shows us just how serious the mutations are that these former miners carry. Fifth, we get a very real sense of the siloization of the Enclave here. The scouts of Site J seem to have had very little, if any, contact with the scouts of the White Spring. Beyond that, when the scientists encounter the Snallygaster and the Deathclaw, they don't know anything about them. This is not to say that the Enclave created these creatures, but West Tech, which was surely tied in with the Enclave, created the Snallygaster here in Appalachia. The Deathclaw was made by the United States government, again not specifically the Enclave, but tied in with the Enclave. The fact that these scientists had no awareness of the existence of these creatures goes to show how information in the Enclave is on a need-to-know basis and is tightly protected. That said, it could also show that the Enclave didn't know everything before the bombs. Sixth, Thomas Eckhart, United States Secretary of Agriculture turned President of the White Spring Enclave, showed no sign of knowing about Site J. He never mentioned it, despite that Site J was a nearby, fully staffed Enclave base when the White Spring was down to 48 people. While it's true that we have mere minutes of recorded conversation from the nearly 9 years he ran the bunker, it's still odd that it wasn't mentioned, given their personnel problems, including the fact that Site J seems to have had a general or two on staff. It's possible that Eckhart decided to just leave the site alone, fearing that they might not share his goal of continuing the war. Seventh, the pink paste the staff had to consume after the non-recycled food ran out appears to be the exact same material found at Suffolk County Charter School in Fallout 4. This paste, which was served to children there as part of the Nutritional Alternative Paste program, was supposed to be a delicious and nutritionally complete food that instead was said to be flavorless and capable of turning your skin pink. It's odd that this side effect doesn't seem to have reared its head after 6 years, so maybe it's a different formulation. I've also considered that this program may have been part of the USDA's Budding Patriots Initiative, described as a national nutritional initiative to prepare the next generation for nation service through enhanced nutrition. Though not shown to be directly connected in-game, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the case. Eighth, it's possible that they were at one point producing new food at Site J. This isn't shown anywhere in the base, but it's not necessarily the case that they've shown us the entire site. We don't really see much in the way of utilities, so it's possible that they had a hydroponics farm as well. I could easily see it being the case that Sodus' lengthening queue times could eventually kill the crops through not watering correctly, harvesting late, planting late, etc. Ninth, the timeline can be difficult to establish. Much of the dated material comes from 2084, and we have two sources using year measurements. For example, they were eating recycled food for the past 6 years, and Sodus erased 15 years of data. I chose to use 15 years as the time the bunker was occupied after the war, assuming that the 15 years started early in 2078 and ended in 2093. This set the 6 years of recycled food to start in 2087 or so. All this is to say that we don't have amazing documentation on dates, so I've done the best I can. 10th, this is the only place in Appalachia that we've found a power-armored Scorched, and they look pretty cool. 11th, until Steel Dawn, the exterior of this radio tower was significantly different. There was no Enclave paraphernalia, but there were items left behind by a small family that sheltered here after the bombs. Lastly, the Site J scouts really brought back some interesting specimens for the scientists to work with. A Mothman, Wendigos, Mirelurks, Gulpers, Zetans. That's right, there were aliens held in confinement at Site J. There are so many questions to go along with this, such as where did they come from? Where's their ship? How did you capture them? Why are they still wearing spacesuits? Why did you have to kill them? All things to ponder. Anyway, I think that should do it for the story of the Enclave at Site J. If you want to receive notifications when I launch these lore videos, you can follow me on Twitter at GamingWithMaps. For those of you who are interested, I've started streaming on Twitch. I don't have a schedule yet, but I do have a couple of streams up, including an examination of this base that I did while talking with a few of y'all. I had fun and I'll definitely be doing more of that going forward. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my patrons Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Jill AWS, Brian, and Dark Malcontent of Metaverse Studios for their support. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.